Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Beer Ladies podcast. I'm your host today, Thandi, and we have got Katie and Lisa and Christina today, and we're going to be talking about St Brigid. Now, I'm going to learn along with the rest of you because I know very little about St Brigid, not just because I'm not Irish, but because I just generally don't know anything about medieval Irish history and or Christian patron saints. Like, I know nothing about it. So we're going to learn from Christina and potentially from Lisa and Katie. I'm sure you're going to be showing us a couple of things along the way. Okay. Should we just get things going, guys? Say hi and tell us what you're drinking. Let's start with Lisa.
Hello, everyone. I am, in the holy words of Irish Beer Twitter, lads, I'm back on the ambush, so I've got some trouble. And for people who are on other beer Twitter, this is just the thing we have here. John Coote, look him up, follow him. You'll see it a lot. But the reason I've gone for trouble is because they are based in Kildare, and we'll hear more about St. Brigid and her potential real and false associations with Kildare.
Absolutely. Katie, what have you got tonight?
I also have a Kildare beer because Irish school told me she was from Kildare, which may or may not be true. I am drinking a McGargles Rosie's Pale Ale, which is brewed within 5 kilometers from my home. So,
oh wow, keeping it really local.
Yeah, so that's Rye River.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Awesome. Christina, what have you got today? Oh, right, fair.
I don't have any Irish beer. I'm sorry. I've gone rogue. I have a Northern Monk Manchester Tart Sour.
Oh, interesting.
Or Tart Stout. Sorry, not Tart Sour. Tart Stout, which really intrigued me. So I'm doing Triannuary, and stouts are not my favorite. Sorry. I mean, I do like the stouts that I like, but typically, like, I'm really fussy with stouts. So I thought I'd try this. This is with sweet cherry, coconut, raspberry, and custard.
Oh,
so it's very intriguing.
Is it still a beer?
I haven't tried it yet. I just poured it. Let me tell you. Oh, I like that.
Oh yeah.
Okay. That's really nice.
I've never had a beer from Northern Monk, and I hear that they're interestingly experimental and probably a bit of hit and miss, but they always do like really wacky stuff. So it sounds fun.
Yeah. I had an ice cream beer from them before, and it was really good.
Yeah, they did a Sunday dinner, didn't they? A Sunday roast beer. I'm not sure how that would taste, but it sounds interesting.
I remember seeing the cans. Did not go for that one, but I've enjoyed a lot of their other stuff. But you're right. Sometimes it can go a bit in a bit of a direction and not always successful. But hey, nice to see people trying new stuff.
Yeah. Just to update you what it tastes like. It's not super sweet, which I like. It's kind of like with the custard and the stout, it's like a creamy, like coffee, like a latte. You get like kind of that notes, but it's, it's on the bitter side as well, but it's balanced with the coconut, which really works well with the creaminess. And then it's just a bit of the sweet cherry on top. I actually really, really like this.
Is there a coffee hint to it as well?
Yeah. It's like a latte. Yeah, it's like a latte.
Oh, nice.
That sounds very interesting. Okay, so what I've got tonight, I've got a session IPA, also within the Rye River suite of brands, I guess. They're a big portfolio, and they're also from Kildare, so that was why I chose Solas. It's a session IPA, and I've really enjoyed the beers that I've had from this range, I guess. They've got this oatmeal pale ale, which is really, really good, and I really like them.
Yeah, I haven't tried their oatmeal pale ale, but their Belgian wit in that range is lovely.
Oh,
worth keeping an eye out. Mostly at Tesco, I think. All right. Well, before we begin, let me just remind everybody at home that we are on all of your podcasting platforms, whether that is Stitcher or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, all of those. We're also on YouTube, and we're also on all the social medias. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, just look for Beer Ladies Podcast and hit us up. We'll respond even, I promise. We're nice people. All right. Well, with that, Christina, do you want to tell us a little bit about St Brigid? And I mean, who is she even?
Right. So actually, if you don't know, I'm writing a book about Irish beer history, and St. Brigid actually makes up a portion of my first chapter. By by design or by profession, I'm a medievalist. I'm an Irish medievalist. I'm specializing in Viking and Irish history. So this is really in my wheelhouse. So it was really fun to write this chapter. So I guess I can give you, an introduction into St. Brigid before I sort of talk about how she's associated with beer. So I guess I'm going to start with being a little bit of depressing to some degree. It's kind of a leap to think that she existed at all. So the first source we have for St. Brigid is a life of St. Brigid, which was written by a monk in Kildare in the 7th century. And this is about 100 years or more after she's supposed to have existed. So way after, if she was around, she even existed in the first place. It might have been written because there's sort of a competition between religious orders in Kildare and Armagh for power. So he might have written this in order to sort of lift up the position of Kildare among Irish monastic communities. So this is really interesting. Not that this actually matters with regard to her beer miracles and things associated with her and ale, I should say, not beer, because we're talking about non-hopped a non-hopped beverage here. But I will explain
the
why
definition of ale in that time and why has it changed now?
So right. So ale is anything that's not hopped. Because Ireland isn't a natural environment for hops, so they didn't grow here. That isn't to say that, well, this is largely speculative, and I talk about this in my book, but there is some evidence that there might be hops in some form of use in Ireland just because of its association with York, because the kings of Dublin were also the kings of York, and we do know that there were hops in York. So it's possible, but hops were also used medicinally, so this is just largely speculation. But yeah, so we're talking about ale, which is non-hopped beer. And then beer started sort of in the Low Countries. It was really, really popular also in Norway and other sorts of places. There's actually a really good archaeological study about the prevalence of hops versus other bittering agents in ale in the medieval period. It's really fascinating, actually. I should tweet that and cite that. But yeah, so we're talking about two different beverages. Though ale is probably encompassing a lot of different things. Because we don't know what they were using bittering agents, and if they were at all. There's some speculation that they perhaps weren't. So that's really interesting. Or if there's all different types of ale, one of which does not have any bittering agents, and one that does. So I can kind of talk a little bit more about that later if anyone's interested in hearing more about that.
Yeah.
but
I have to say, my Catholic Irish upbringing is like, what do you mean she didn't exist? She was an amalgamation.
Right. So actually the title of my chapter is a goddess, a druid, and a nun walk into a brewery. Because there's this idea, well, I think St. Brigid really embodies sort of this transition from pagan culture to Catholic or Catholic Christian, because it's, the amalgamation of all these different figures. So a goddess who becomes a saint, a druid who becomes a nun. And there's speculation that Brigid actually is originated from a pagan goddess. So according to certain scholars like Rhys, we have the goddess Brigg, which is the Celtic goddess of fire and light. And there's some place names, evidence that suggests that there is this goddess named Brigg. There's also, or Brigid actually. So in Scotland, there's a Roman era statue that's inscribed with Die Nymphae Brigantae. Oh, my Latin pronunciation. Let me tell you, I can read it. I can read it, but when you put me on the spot, suddenly I forget how to pronounce everything.
I'm sure we won't fire you just because you don't know how to pronounce a dead language.
I mean, I do know how to pronounce it. I just get nervous.
Good. And we have that sort of pan, even though it's a sort of not super accurate thing, but we have this sort of pan Celtic thing where she pops up in sort of Scots Gaelic and a little bit in Wales too, but it's but yes, always that association with sort of fire and light and this time of year, because we're kind of right in between, if I'm remembering correctly from my folklore studies back in the day, we're right in between solstices, or and so that's why we've got the Celtic holiday right here. So it just sort of what's a good word for it? Sort of slides nicely into suddenly being a saint's day. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we also have like Cormac's Glossary, which is a 9th century text, which makes mention of a pagan goddess called Brigid and her 3 sisters of the same name. So this is kind of where we get this idea of this tripartite goddess, who is represented by a learned woman, a woman of healing, and a woman of smithworking. And so these were all combined to be this triple goddess. However, some scholars don't believe that there was a goddess at all, and in fact that it was actually the other way around. The goddess was invented after the saint, and
so who
that
would the saint be based on then?
the saint was based on maybe a nun that existed. But so for example, there's a scholar, Lisa Biddle, who contended that the literati of Ireland, which is to say the monks and those who were writing, used pagan imagery to legitimize Brigid and speak to readers and listeners in Ireland, but there wasn't a goddess, and actually that this imagery was used to get them to understand on a way that they could, based on like their experiences and their context, and not that there was any goddess at all. It was just a way to have this conversation with people who weren't Christian yet, and they were hoping that would be so.
I'd posit to say that that's all of religious texts, but you know, you can shoot me later.
Yeah, so, and that's the thing about these Christian authors writing about saints. We know that they have lots of bias here, and these are purely propaganda texts. And we don't have any writings from Brigid herself. So only sources we have are over 100 years after her death. So, you know.
So when was she alive, or supposedly alive?
So the sources, which are absolutely problematic, do list St. Brigid is likely being born in 451.
451.
451. Wow. And her death is recorded in the Annals of Tigernach and the Chronicon Scotorum in 525. Though some speculate that she actually died in 523. But the work that I was talking about before, and there's 2 others that I can mention, was like 680. So we're talking way after as she's gone, and we don't have a source in between, and that could very well be because the source is gone, right? So that's the other thing we have to be careful with. Just an absence of evidence is not an evidence of absence.
So get together, everyone. Yes.
Yeah.
So you know, there very well could be other works, but we don't have them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean that she didn't exist.
Yeah, and word of mouth would have been like, a lot of people wouldn't have been able to read and write back then, and so it was all like the Shanachie would have come into.
Right. So we have lots of oral traditions and things, but you know, we need to be really careful. Like there's because these they call them hagiographers, the people that write about saints. They already have an agenda here, right? So they have a reason why they're writing these things. I mean, there's the story of St. Patrick, who was, you know, around the same time as Brigid, and they're talking about him coming to Dublin. And of course, Dublin isn't founded till way after St. Patrick is dead. You know, hundreds of years.
Sign by the cathedral. You're saying it's a lie? Oh
no! Way after. Yeah, because I mean, of course, we have monastic communities at like Tala and Finglas, but those predate Dublin.
Right.
So those were around a long time ago, and there are monks from those two who had a little bit of an argument about drinking beer, which I guess I could talk about a little bit later.
But I thought for a second there you were going to tell me St. Patrick was an amalgam as well, and he didn't exist. And I was like, oh no!
No,
I'm going to be really like put on my historian hat here right now, and not my any other hat. And I mean, it's with all these early saints, like the evidence really is scant.
Yeah.
So we do have to kind of be really careful. That said, with St. Brigid, I'm not really going to go into details with her other texts and stuff, because I'm happy to talk about that on Twitter or something else, but I don't really feel like that's what we need to focus on when our topic is about beer. But it doesn't actually matter if she existed or not when we're talking about these stories of her life and about ale, because what it tells us is, regardless of what was happening in her time period, in the time period in which the author wrote the text, her association with ale and the way that he writes about her association with ale may indicate that this was something that was happening by nuns in his time period.
Okay.
That's a good point.
So
Yeah,
that
okay.
so and I'll explain what I mean by that when I sort of go into the stories about her and ale. So like even if she didn't exist, it does tell us about perhaps the truth about living and working in monastic communities at the time of writing, especially because the first text is by a monk in Kildare and he's talking about her at her monastery in Kildare. So, you know, he's probably while might not be reliable for other things, he might be a good source about what things were happening or what was within the scope of work for people in that monastic community, and used his own experiences to write his story about Bridget. And before we really move on to me telling you the stories of Bridget, I do want to make mention that Bridget's the tale of Bridget, the Saint's Life of St. Bridget, was the first in Ireland. So the monk who is writing this, Cogistus, didn't have any other like sort of homegrown text to base this off of. He was creating sort of his own Irish genre. Now, that's not to say that there were not works in the continent that he would have absolutely been familiar with. Certainly, he would have had access and understood these things. But from an Irish perspective, he's really building it from the ground up, which is really, really interesting. And I really recommend reading some of these texts because, you know, Bridget isn't exactly the saint that, or how we I guess perceive saints now, and what kind of behavior they would kind of get up to. And
I don't think she is what we were taught about if you went to school in Ireland. I don't think.
No.
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 You know,
So Katie,
a brewing badass. You know,
Katie, what did you learn about St. Brigid?
So, 1st of February, we would all in school, we would be told to bring in rushes, of which I have a bundle here that I prepared earlier.
For those watching on YouTube, Katie's about to demonstrate some things with what looks like just very long branches. Not branches, they're like leaves, right?
They're rushes. I suppose maybe they're a form of bulrush. Some of them still have their bits on them. They're just like bulrushes, little bulrushes.
Okay.
This is what they're made of. And we would go out and to our fields or within our 5K, seeing as we're in lockdown in Ireland, you know, and collect these. And we would bring them into school. And on the 1st of February, we would be taught how to weave a St. Brigid's Day cross. So I will show you now. So you get two.
Yeah.
Two of these. And you do one at, you fold one around the other at 90 degrees. So you have what? A flat.
Like an upside down T.
Like an upside down T, except one of them is doubled over the other one.
Yes.
Okay. And then you get your next strand, your next reed, and you fold it over the leg of the T, so that it becomes upright. This is on YouTube as well. So if you want to.
For those listening, I'd encourage you to watch this episode on YouTube just to supplement your lack of
Especially
visual.
if you're homeschooling kids and you want to get them out of your hair for a few hours, you tell them, go out, pick some grass and make a cross. Well, don't pick grass.
While mommy and daddy listens to the Beer Ladies podcast.
While mommy and daddy drink beer with the Beer Ladies, exactly. So then I just got another one, and you bend it in half, and then one half goes in front, one half goes behind, and all you do is you keep working that. It is that easy.
So what you're going to end up with, though, is something that looks a little bit like a cross or even a ninja star. I sort of think of it as a little bit of a
pinwheel.
So I've been working on this very badly. My skills, obviously, my Catholic primary school sweatshop skills have worn off. But I've been. It ends up. You can see the kind of the little pattern in the middle is kind of very symbolic of the St. Brigid's Day cross.
Very
cool.
And I'm going to finish this off, and I'm going to give it to Lisa as my first housewarming gift.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes, and for those seeing the giant mess behind me, this should all be gone, since by the time this episode arrives, we will have moved house, and I'm sure we'll be completely unpacked. Everything will be put away. It'll be glorious. So
yeah. And so,
last words.
Yeah, when we were in school, and the teacher would then talk about, while we were all occupied and busy. And so we would be told about how St. Brigid was this great healer, and she used to heal all the wounded animals, and the sick would come to her and she would help them. We never heard that she was a brewer.
Mm-hmm.
We never heard that she was a badass. All we heard was so I'm trying to remember. She was really really caring to the needy, and God saw this and said, Bridget, I'm going to give you your own place. So she put down her cloak on the ground, and where she put her cloak was where her convent was built, apparently.
Okay.
And that's where she got her building or her monastery to mind all the people in the community. So that's what we were. That's what we were taught. That's what I was taught in West Clare.
I must tell you, because my son was telling me about this cloak story. Okay, so he had learned a version of this already. Now being here in Irish Catholic school for a couple of years, he told it to me, and then I went and just like Googled the story because I didn't understand the way that he told it to me. But so here's what at least Wikipedia says. What Wikipedia says was that she wanted to build a monastery. She went to the king of Leinster, and he said, basically no. She prayed for his mind to be softened, and then she then said to him, "How about wherever my cloak lays, you give me that land?" And he said, "Go for it, you crazy bloody woman." And she sent her 3 sisters on each corner of the cloak, and they kept running in all directions, which is, I think, where the Brigid's cross shape kind of comes from.
Possibly. Yeah, that makes sense.
So, I mean, if you think about it, it is kind of a square, even though you'd probably see it as a cross when it's turned, as a pinwheel cross, but it's kind of a square. So they kept running, and the cloak kept expanding. Therefore, whatever land the cloak touched was hers. Yeah. And apparently it was in this lovely fertile region with lots of trees and blueberries and a lake and all these things, which is why on St. Brigid's Day on the 1st of February, it's customary to eat jam.
Oh, hey.
Is it?
Apparently it is.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't know that, but I thought the story was really, really endearing.
It is. It's a lovely story, though, isn't it?
I like that she tricked the king. I think that's just awesome.
and she made his mind soften.
Yes.
Yes. And that's the thing, isn't it, about all these sort of folk traditions is they pop in and out, and some of them are never as old as, well, I won't say never, but often not as old as you might be led to believe they are as a child. Like you'll also see things here and there about sort of well dressing when you go out and sort of clean up the local holy well and decorate it and all sorts of that. But oftentimes that doesn't really predate kind of the 18th and even 19th century, and sometimes it's sort of a revival, or it didn't even really happen necessarily, but it's been revived because it's just kind of fun, and why not? So I think you always have that little bit at the back of your mind to be like, well, maybe this never really happened as a sort of long-standing tradition, but it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. And excuse for a party when you're allowed to see other people again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. The value of these stories is far more than the truth, I guess.
Right.
And that's
yeah. And I kind of think it's a shame that you didn't really learn about how badass she is, because I mean that's not her first sort of encounter with a king. So speaking of Brigid being a badass, she's kind of like the proto Robin Hood, right? So from early days, she's stealing everything she can get her hands on, like absolutely everything in her father's house. She is stealing, and she's giving it away to the poor. I think my favorite story is she steals butter to give, or ham to give to a starving dog, and then she's able to miraculously recreate this so that way her father doesn't notice it's missing. But as you can imagine, this penchant for the 5-finger discount didn't really do much for her family. So her father decides to sell her off into slavery, and so he goes to do this. And while he's trying to do this, he hands Brigid his extremely valuable sword. This might be one of the most valuable possessions this man owns, if not the most valuable possession this man owns. And he left it with her. Right. So she does what, of course, we would all assume that she doesn't. She steals it and gives it away. So the king, so her father's like, "This is why, king. Seriously, take her, take her." And the king's like, "Hold on, would you steal from me? And she's like, oh yeah, absolutely. I would steal everything. Yeah, I would steal everything that I could get my hands on and give it all to God. And he was like, well, see, she's holy because she would steal from me. So that means she's
Ooh.
holy. So she can go be a nun. That's fine. That's fine that she can be a nun. And well, I mean, this went over really, really poorly with a lot of like local nobles. And one of them is, badgering her about, you need to get married. What is this about a nun? You need to be married. Da, 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 da. And well, no, I'm actually going to be a nun. No, you need to be married. Okay. Yeah, that's not going to happen. And, he's telling her, she's beautiful and all this other stuff. And so she takes her fingers and gouges out her own eye and hands it
As you
to
do.
her.
As you do. Yeah.
And is basically like, how here's the beautiful eye for you. How pretty am I now? No one's going to ask you for a blind girl, I think is basically what she says. And she exploded her own eyeball. And then she decided he was just a little bit too cheeky. So then she went ahead and just exploded both of his eyeballs for his insolence.
Hey.
That's amazing.
So, it's a shame that you don't hear these stories. And she was also performing miraculous abortions, which is probably why you don't hear some of this stuff. Because I'm sure that the Catholic
That'll do
Church
it.
probably doesn't want you to know about how she just makes babies go away. With God. That God is helping her make the babies go away.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a reason I didn't hear that when I was growing up.
Might be a reason
Yeah.
for that. But I guess I should probably start talking about beer because
Yes. How is she even related to beer? Yeah.
Right.
As far as I'm aware, she's the patron saint of brewing, right? Not brewers, but brewing. The process.
I don't know about that.
Oh, okay.
That's modern stuff. So I don't know what she is in the sainthood now because I do not follow the church teachings now.
Okay.
Something I should probably look up, but I don't really read about that. But I do know that, well, she's associated with children and milk. That's a thing that I do know. So I'll get to Christina, just spit it out. I'll get to a story about
Awesome.
Bridget because I've been talking around this and not to it. So she's founded this monastic community in Kildare, right? And Easter is fast approaching. And much like Jesus is supposedly multiplied bread and fish to feed the masses, Bridget, she turned one bag of malt into enough ale to supply 17 churches.
Sweet.
So I'm going to kind of tell you about this story. So all these nuns are gathered around in this monastic community and they're which is Kildare, which actually means Church of the Oak, if you're not familiar with Irish. So they found themselves in her presence and Easter is fast approaching. And Bridget sort of decides at the last minute, she's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make ale for everyone around me.
That's awesome.
And the nuns are like, oh, we only have this. How are we going to make this for that? And she's like, I got this. It's okay. It's going to be completely fine. And so she says she's going to, work with God and God is going to help her. So they only have at this point 1 vat, 2 tubs and 1 bushel of malt. And they have to make all this ale for, 17 churches. And I'm just going to read a quote from one of her lives. And it says this. Low Sunday approached. Quote, I do not think it fortunate now, said Bridget to her maidens, not to have ale on Low Sunday for the bishop who will preach and say mass. As soon as she said that, 2 maidens went to bring in water, and they had a large churn for the purpose. And Bridget was not aware of this. When they came back again, Bridget saw them there. Thanks be to God, said Bridget. God has given us ale for our bishop. And the nuns became frightened then. God help us, O maiden. Whatever foolish thing I said, I have not said anything evil, O nuns. The water which was brought inside, because you have blessed it, God did what you desired and immediately was changed into ale with the smell of wine from it. And better ale was never set to brew in the whole world. And the 1 churn was sufficient for them and their guests and the bishop.
That's all right for some. Hey.
So, we see this. And then of course, after Easter is even fulfilled, the bishop wants more ale. And she's like, Ron, sorted, more ale. Boom. but yeah, so this idea of ale, and we know that ale feasts were really common practice in early medieval Ireland, and particularly around Easter. Actually, we're talking about St. Patrick again. One of the lives of St. Patrick actually makes a similar association. One of his descendants actually had to provide ale for Easter, for the mass for the people on Easter.
Why would people have ale feasts at specific times? And why would, let's say, the 1st of February, I know it's supposed to be the beginning of spring, like that's at least what I'd read, which was St Brigid's Day, sort of ale fest, I guess, in those days, but St Brigid's Day now. And why Easter specifically? Was that a Christianity thing?
Well, they just had ale feasts. Like that was just
Oh.
the thing that they had. So that was like,
Oh, no, I'm jumping ahead to Catholicism, so I'm going to let you talk.
well, I'm actually going to scroll down in my book and I'm going to pull up the parts where I talk about ale feasts. But yes, ale feasts are actually really common. Actually, in one of the sources that I worked with, one of the entitlements of one of the kings is actually that he is owed ale feasts. And actually, another part of it is one of the kings in Ireland is known for their ale feasts. He's actually listed as such and such of the ale feasts.
Sweet, that's a good,
That's a
you're
great
doing it
title.
right.
Yeah,
I want to live in that kingdom.
Yeah.
So we know this, and hospitality and all these things were really, really important. So for example, Le Borne Cert, which is the Book of Rights, which is the thing that lists all these rents and stipends. And for some of them, one of the kings, it has to give out like 100 drinking horns. I mean, and this is like 100 drinking horns, 100 horses, 100 swords. Like this is, because it's included in that line, you can kind of tell how important drinking is. And these drinking horns are, because they're associated with, in the same group as horses, swords, very high status items. There's a story that I talk about of a guy who won't drink ale unless it's out of a drinking horn, because, quote, he hadn't drank out of anything else since he was weaned from his mother. So he's only going to be drinking. It's a horn, and he's not drinking anything.
So this is that guy who will only drink out of the branded glass, and if it's not the right glass.
But the drinking horns, would they be like deer antlers or bull horns or?
Yeah, actually, you can. Actually, if you look on, if you go to the National Museum of Ireland when it's open, and actually have a picture, and I will tweet this. They have some. I think they're later. They're much later than early medieval, but they have drinking horns there, and you can see them, because I think I estimated that there's like over 130 references to entitlements of ale or of drinking horns in this Book of Rights. So like this is a really important part of their culture. And actually, I think really interestingly, there's a reference to queens actually owing each other 3 drinking horns, and an exchange of ale between queens was part of this entitlement, which I find just absolutely fascinating, because just don't see a lot of references to queens, but in fact that they had to exchange.
I feel like there's a little cottage industry that's waiting to come to light, where we could make, replica drinking horns.
And there's also there's mazer cups, which are actually also much later medieval, but you see those popping up in all of these Irish wills, deeding their mazer cup to their women, deeding it to their daughters, and men deeding it to their sons. It's quite, and it's also quite valuable. And then there's also another kind of cup, which is Meather cup, which is the sort of the cup with like 4 handles. And again, they have those at the National Museum of Ireland. So cups, drinking vessels, these are important, can be quite valuable, very, very valuable.
Yeah, so quite analogous to things happening in the Viking world, and in the really your whole North Atlantic, I guess, to a certain extent. So
yep. There's this obsession with ale and feasting and hosting.
The hosting, the hospitality
very important.
Part is huge.
Very, very important. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Sorry, I'm going through and trying to find something.
So were there any more stories of Brigid and beer specifically?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
Yes,
cool. Okay, so
yeah.
there
So
were
I
many
have
stories. It wasn't just.
yeah, so it's
Mm,
actually similar to Katie was talking about like her healing powers,
mm,
and one of them she turns water into ale, and it's not just ale, it's healing ale, and it saves her foster
mm.
mother's life.
Oh,
So there's this kind of idea that she's turning water into ale to cure people, and then let me find it because I think it's sort of worth reading in its entirety. Um, we have a sort of an 11th century poem that's attributed to her, and it's called St Brigid's Ale Feast. And basically, of course, this is written well after she's well long gone. Um, but yeah, and it's in Old Irish. But when she's asked what her view of heaven is, she says the following: I would like to have the men of heaven in my own house, with vats of good cheer laid out before them. I would like to have a great lake of ale for Christ the King. I'd like to be watching the heavenly family, drinking it down for all eternity. So heaven
Yeah,
is in a
great lake
lake
of
of
ale.
beer.
lake of beer. Let's do
That
it.
sounds amazing.
I know, it sounds really excellent, doesn't
How
it?
is there
I could
not a
get- I
lake
could
of beer
get
to
religious for
spa?
that.
Oh my
I just want to
gosh.
get like a Lilo and just hang out with a straw in my Lilo. We're good.
In the lake of ale.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Reminds me of those like brew dog hotels where you bath in beer.
Oh yes.
And, like have beer jacuzzis and stuff.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's a business opportunity here for, post COVID.
oh
People are
God, I
gonna
think.
want weird hospitality. Let's do it.
Do you think so? Do you think that people are going to be like forever off put from being that close or sharing fluids that other
It's an
people might have
interesting
shared?
question.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I was thinking about that earlier. I was like, am I going to be okay with things that I was normally okay with before anymore? Because when I watch it on TV now, there's even like a gut reaction to
I
me.
know
It's
you
like,
have
oh,
that
you're too
spoiling,
close. There's
like,
too many
oh.
people. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody posted a picture of Grafton Street on Reddit, and I was like, oh my God, that looks horrible. Like pre-COVID Grafton
Right.
Did
Street.
we
Yeah.
ever do
Yeah.
that?
Why?
No, it's so interesting.
I know it's very weird. I don't know. I can't imagine sharing the public swimming pools or those sorts. That kind of thing. Like I suppose bleach kills everything, and so does chlorine. So maybe I wouldn't be that worried. But we'll see.
It's very, yeah, it's sort of jarring, I guess, to
Mm,
kind of figure out. Oh, yes, this was yes, this was one that I wanted to talk about.
hmm
The three sorrowful ones of an alehouse: the man who gives the feast, the man to whom it is given, and the man who drinks without being satiated. And like,
Oh.
I get why the man who gives the feast is sad because it's expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big outlay. Yeah.
Yes.
And I get why the man who drinks without being satiated is unhappy because that sucks.
You
Yeah.
filling a
Yeah.
bucket with a hole. Yeah.
But why is the dude who's getting the party mad?
Right? Oh my gosh.
Well, maybe there's something that he is duty bound to do that we don't know about.
I
If
think
a
he's
party
just an
is,
introvert.
he could be.
Or maybe it's that the party never ends.
Yeah, and he has to
Maybe.
talk to everybody. It's probably because he has to talk to everybody. Ugh.
Mm, mhm.
It's like when at a wedding when you have to like talk to all the people. And it's like, oh, this is your cousin's third cousin's fourth removed grandfather.
Yeah.
Okay, nice to meet you.
And you're like, oh, hello, Maureen. How are you? I haven't seen you since I was a toddler, but it's great. How's the husband? Oh, he's dead. Is he? Sorry.
Exactly.
He's passed. Yeah.
No, but it's really interesting. Oh, and so that's actually from it's a text called the Triads of Ireland, which are all these like three things that they list together that are whatever. So for an example, another triad with ale is the three unfortunate things for a man are a scant drink of water, thirst in an ale house, and a narrow seat upon a field. So thirst in an ale house.
Does a narrow seat upon a field, is that a metaphor?
Yeah, I
or
was
is that-
wondering.
I have no
Yeah.
idea what that is. But also, I want to draw attention to the fact that it says a scant drink of water, because if I see one more person say that medieval people didn't drink water, I'm going to scream.
Hear,
Medieval
hear.
people drank water. Also, the medieval period was global and not just in Europe.
Here, here.
And also what happened in France, or what we call now France, is not the same as what happened in Ireland. So please stop saying things like medieval people didn't drink ale, because like, wow, no.
I'm sorry, but I'm still just interested in how the definition of ale changed from that didn't use hops to that uses a specific yeast.
Yeah, so I think that kind of lies in when we start getting when lager is possible. right? So prior to that, we didn't really have that. So we use the difference between ale and beer. But then when the definition changes, when we have something introduced, lager, cold fermented lager yeast, so then we switched to ale versus lager instead of ale versus beer.
Because it's interesting, because I still see, or I still hear some people here now even talking about the distinction between ale and beer, as if ale is like stouts and porters and beer is like lagers. And I'm like, but ale is a beer. They're all beers. They're in the umbrella of beer. They're just different yeast strains. So I'm actually well confused. And instead of trying to be, I'm trying to suppress my natural urge to be like, stop being an idiot, here's the truth. But actually I need to educate myself, because clearly there's something I've missed.
Yeah, I think it's more of the reverse. I think beer is under the umbrella of ale. Ale's first for most places, and not beer. So beer comes from ale, which is the original sort of drink, not beer. So that's sort of the original one. And
that's you told Thandi.
That's
no,
me,
isn't it?
Educates it.
I don't mean it that way.
Schooled.
But we do know that there's like all these
Totes.
different there's all these different kinds of ales that they're making in Ireland. There's an entire poem that was written to the Scottish prince Cano MacGartnan, who was killed in 687 CE. I'm not really sure exactly when the poem was written off the top of my head, but it's basically a poem about different ales.
Ooh.
The red ale
fun.
of this clan, and this ale of this one, and there's another one. What is that? Oh, there's a reference to an ale feast, and the Saxon ale of bitterness, which might imply the use of hops, or really strong bittering agents, because
what else would have been used instead of hops for bittering at that
right.
time?
So there's we don't know.
There's a lot of things it could be that get turned up in your modern gruits, which I'm air quoting.
So I'm actually investigating this more, because what I'm probably going to have to do is go through sort of like early medieval Irish or medieval Irish medicinals and see what sort of things that we can see a crossover with, and then kind of imply backwards. But this is really pure speculation. Nobody knows. No one's ever going to know unless we come up with some
time machine.
Random, or some source just pops up that's been in like private collection or in a bog somewhere, which is possible, because we've had that happen.
Yeah, there's bog water. Yeah, why not?
It really could. So we have an antiquarian, O'Curry, who postulated that buckbean might have been popular because it was found near some forts, early Irish forts. So
I've never heard of buckbean.
So he said that it might be used in the early period to flavor beer.
Okay.
But we do know that when the Irish go to the continent, they complain about the ale being too bitter.
So maybe it was just sweeter anyway.
So there is a suggestion that maybe they really didn't bitter it. That just wasn't a thing that they did, and that this is just in our head, that this is what ale has to be, and this is what it has to be, and this is right. and it's possible that they didn't, or that there's again multiple different types of ale. One that wasn't. One that was just like sweet wort fermented, one that was maybe in between, one that did this, one that did that. I mean, I really don't want to pigeon. I think it's sort of frankly ridiculous to assume that there was only one kind of ale.
Yeah, and I reckon they must have added whatever was growing around them, and like seaweed. I mean, Ireland is such a small island. I'm sure seaweed or heather. You see heather everywhere,
nettles,
Bog myrtle or sweet gale is probably possible.
Berries.
We know that was popular, so I would probably venture that was used in some and we do know from like later medieval sources, and I don't want to get into this too much because this is beyond our timeline, that they had sort of complicated grain bills. I mean, they're using 4 different types of grain to brew beer, which, I mean, when you think of medieval people, you're probably thinking, oh, it's probably, the simple thing, but 4 different kinds of grain to make an ale in a monastic community. So these aren't necessarily people making really simple ales. They might have been quite complex, lots of things going on.
Yeah, and that depends on the size of your monastic community too. Some of these are huge and have enormous numbers of lay staff effectively doing the work for them, and especially when you're talking, and it's less my area of expertise, but when you're talking medieval Ireland, where you kind of have these monastic communities instead of cities really. So this is where everyone's gone who's gone somewhere. So what are
Yeah.
they making? And they're probably all going to have their own, their own local flavor.
Yeah, because I mean, early medieval Ireland was probably underpopulated, and it didn't have cities. Like the Irish, it just wasn't really a thing that they did. That's just wasn't their culture. I mean, certainly there's houses of like the chief and or the king that's going to have more people around it. But for most part, like Lisa said, if there's a community, it's just really about around a monastic community. And that being said, that these monastic communities are not like really peaceful people. I mean, monastic communities went to war with each other. So this idea that the Vikings came in and like just attacked these peaceful monasteries is just utter rubbish. Like these monastic communities went to war with each other. They sacked each other. I mean, we're not talking about, contemplating life in silent meditation all the time. We're talking about, I don't like what Talus said. I don't like him. Let's go get him.
Yeah.
Kind of a thing. And some kings were also leaders of monastic communities. These are powerful institutions with powerful leading men and also powerful women. Brigid is listed as quite powerful, so powerful that she was mistakenly ordained a bishop. Like
I hate when that happens.
Yeah, like there's no lie to the way that she exists in the lives, that she is for the most part listed as powerful. Now there are some that later ones that possibly list her as being submissive to her king and submissive to her god, and this might be telling us a little bit about the community in which that text was written. But the earlier texts kind of have her being like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go do this. And here's my eyeball and, things like that. So, that changes in the lives, which also might tell us a little bit about who's writing it and why they're writing it, and maybe a change in the society in which it was created. It's all very interesting to me.
Absolutely. And some of these monastic women are living their best lives. Like they're like, I'm not going to die of childbirth. I'm just going to hang out with all my other rich lady friends, and we're going to do it up. They're not all doing sort of, chastity, poverty. That, some of them are just like, they're living it up. They're having a great time in their fancy monastery and getting the best food and best beer. And
honestly, it sounds grand.
100%. 100%. If I went back and if I had to go, if I was forced back into time, because honestly, I know people are like, oh, I love to go back in time. No, you do not.
No.
You do not want to go back in time. No.
We live in the best time period.
Not as a woman.
Not as a woman, exactly.
No.
You don't really want to go back as a guy either. I mean, like, killed in battle doesn't sound like fun. And all the diseases, no. And the smell.
Yeah, I think the hygiene, like the lack of hygiene.
Yeah.
No, you don't want to go back in time. But if I was forced into a time machine and sent back in time, I would have been a nun in an early medieval one, not one of those. I don't want to be an anchoress. I don't want to be anything where I'm locked up or walled into something. I want to be a wealthy nun in a wealthy monastic community, because I mean, seriously, some of them were really living their best lives.
Yeah, they get the best books. They get all the best food. Yeah.
I think it's weird for nuns to be wealthy as opposed to like just above the poverty line, which is how I've always known them. Like I've always known nuns to be like really modest, really frugal, shying away from all of these like monetary things in life and whatnot. So it's like it blows my mind actually to know that nuns were of the wealthy elite in a sense.
Not always. I mean,
not always. Sure.
I think the Reformation kind of put that right.
Well, before that, the men in charge put a kind of a halt to that. It really, really depends on, and this is not my area of expertise, but I did teach a class at Trinity on religion, death, and culture, so I am somewhat familiar with this. But it really depends on what monastic community. Are they Franciscans? Are they Dominicans? Like, what kind of, because, with monks and nuns, because some of them were really poor. Like that was, and even in Ireland, some of like St. Columbanus talks about how his monks should not enjoy eating and drinking. And they should not eat or drink for pleasure. This is not a thing that they should be doing. And then there's actually not a war, but like a war of words, if we'll go, between two leaders of a certain reforming sect in Ireland, one from Tella and one from Finglas, about the place of ale within their communities. And the one monk was like, no drinking at all. Drinking is too fun. You're not supposed to be having fun. and the other monk basically quipped, my monks will get into heaven just the same.
Yeah.
But but both monks allowed their followers to drink while they were on pilgrimage. So that was okay to have ale when they were on pilgrimage, but just not when they were home. Because pilgrimages were actually quite much more prevalent than people kind of think they do. They kind of feel like, oh, medieval people must have just stayed where they were. And that's really not necessarily
Yeah, they're
the case.
package holidaying a lot of times. Like they're going off, some are shorter, but some of them are going all over the place. So.
Where would they have gone on a medieval pilgrimage?
To holy sites. To whatever holy sites were closest to them, largely. I mean, they might go far if they're wealthy to Rome, or not even wealthy, if they have the time or the inclination to go further places. But Canterbury to Rome would have been a popular one for people in England, and in Ireland, maybe perhaps to Armagh, Kildare, possibly if you're sort of close to that. Just the closest sort of monastic community was probably the most reachable, but definitely much further. Oh, yes. And I really encourage everyone to sort of Google pilgrimage pins and medallions and things that people wore on pilgrimage, because they're quite wonderful and hilarious. Some of them are
and
really
hilarious.
Funny.
I'm intrigued now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to do this.
Yeah, there's dicks. There's dicks. There's lots of dicks.
They're lucky. It's all good. Yeah.
Trigger warning.
Medieval people were funny. Like sometimes I think people just think that they were just these boring state people, but they were just like us. They like to drink to get drunk. They like to have fun. They like to joke around. I mean,
I feel like these are universal truths, and I would hate to be part of a time period where that wasn't the case. As in, it doesn't have to involve alcohol, but like the whole having fun and being lighthearted and just like, I don't know, having a good time and seeing life as more than chores or whatever. I can't imagine life without that. That's crazy.
No, and they had fun. They knew how to have fun, and some of the stuff that they had fun with is probably like beyond what we would deem as acceptable now.
Very definitely, I would say. Especially when you think back to Roman popes and things like that.
Oh yes, going back to monastic communities and wealth. I mean, we're talking about popes that had multiple concubines, accessing all sorts of alcohol and wealth. I mean, and the same thing with bishops and stuff. I mean, some of them. I mean, for a while they were allowed to have to be married, right? So they had wives. They were married, and then when they didn't have wives, they had official concubines that were well known, and that was fine until it wasn't, but it was mostly fine.
And they had boys, like the
reason they didn't want people getting married is because they didn't want them to have children to inherit whatever the position was that they had.
Gotcha.
That was the problem. So if you didn't have a legitimate wife, then you had natural children, and that wasn't a concern because they weren't going to inherit it. That is a gross oversimplification, and I'm sure someone's going to be like, that's not a reason. Okay. Right, but that is a reason.
One of them. So is there anything that we should wrap up with now about St Brigid, besides the fact that February 1st is coming up, and whether you like it or not, I'm going to be eating blueberry jam because apparently that's the thing. Ooh, Katie's got her St Brigid cross coming along.
So I have been weaving away here. If anyone is watching on YouTube, you'll have seen stuff fluttering in front of my face. But yeah, my cross is coming along nicely there. So I'll add another few layers. Yeah.
Will you do us a favor though when you finish it? Will you post a picture on Twitter and Instagram?
Yes, I'm very bad at Twitter and Instagram. I'm so sorry.
You'll be okay. We'll remind you.
Yeah.
Send it to us. The Beer Ladies podcast can always tweet.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. After this episode drops, of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. Christina, is there anything that you want to sort of finally say about St Brigid?
Yeah, I guess I basically want to just leave with, even if she wasn't real, the importance of her within the context of ale and the history of ale in Ireland is really, really important. And I don't think that we can have any conversation about ale and brewing in Ireland without a conversation about St. Brigid. And I think that her brewing, whether in the stories about her brewing, sort of demonstrates that this was probably something that happened within the monastic community that the monk wrote about, that was happening in Kildare around him when he was at the monastery. And so he was explaining and talking about things that he saw. And so this tells us that nuns were brewing in early medieval Ireland.
Yeah.
Go really medieval important. Irish nuns is what I say.
Badass women.
Yeah.
Lisa, Katie, anything from you guys that you want to add?
I have a sort of quick but peculiar personal reflection on Brigid, which is that there was it's now sadly gone a wonderful old school craft beer bar, but old school Irish boozer in Philadelphia called Brigid's. It was fantastic. It's where I did all of my BJCP classes, and it was a wonderful place. But I've always had a sort of I would say soft spot for Brigid, real or imaginary, because of that place. So I like to see that tradition of her being associated with brewing and good beer lived on up until quite recently. But it'll pop back up. There'll be another bar named after her, and it was just wonderful. So hopefully they will revive it at some point.
That's awesome. Katie, any last words from you, friend?
Any last words? My last words are I'm going to send this on to all my primary school teacher friends. And I think all of you should. And I hope that they update their curriculum slightly just to show how empowered she was. And I think that she is an amazing role model for people.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually,
young girls.
Absolutely.
I guess children steal shit.
but still, but as long as you're giving it away, as long as it's got like noble intentions.
I know my children would always steal my car keys and like push them down the toilet, and I'm like, what's the story with that?
It doesn't sound super noble to me, Katie.
No, there were three. There were three.
I love it.
And Lord knows all the teachers can use a drink. They're trying to teach from home. It's
Oh my gosh,
Oh
yeah.
God, yes.
So
Yes.
Well, toast to St Brigid's, guys.
Mm.
Sure.
I'll take a slancher for that.
Slancha.
All right, everybody, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our website, which is currently under a bit of construction. Beer Ladies Podcast, that's what you need to do. And hit us up. Tell us your favorite stories about St Brigid once you've listened to this. And we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.